Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to World War III. Want to get into this whole China, Taiwan, Russia, Ukraine situation? Is there a comparison? Should Taiwan fear China is going to do something similar to what Russia is currently doing to Ukraine? Let's get into that right now, guys. It says Taiwan fears what's happening in Ukraine will happen there in China. This is an article from March 27th. The war in Ukraine is making much of Europe nervous, but it's also causing a ton of concern halfway around the world in Taiwan. Many in Taiwan see uncomfortable parallels between their island, which is off the coast of China, and Ukraine. To help understand how Taiwan is processing the war, we are joined by NPR China affiliates correspondent John Urich. Hi, John. So this is kind of a transcript here and just kind of the overwrite on what's going on in Russia compared to what's happening in China. And if you are the Chinese, this situation with Russia, it presents to you a unique opportunity to where you can really balance the powers almost. Like, you see what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, and you think to yourself, if we did something to Taiwan right now, yeah, the media in the West would focus on us, but there would still be that focus on the Russian-Ukrainian war and conflict that's going on in Europe. So it's almost like they would be split, as opposed to if no other major wars are happening and China tries to invade Taiwan or tries to take over Taiwan, that would be the biggest thing in terms of Western media coverage. Now, personally, I think China saw the day that Russia invaded Ukraine, and I think they said, let's learn some things. Let's see the Western reaction to the situation, and obviously the West reacted very harshly. We've seen crazy amounts of sanctions onto Russia. Instead of China using this this sort of Russia-Ukraine-European conflict, instead of using that as kind of a buffer to invade Taiwan, they're saying, let's use it as a learning experience on what not to do and what to do when it comes to, if we want Taiwan, what is a way to where we can take Taiwan without alienating ourselves from the entire West. Personally, I think China right now, they don't want to take Taiwan at this current moment. They'll get it eventually. 100% they'll get it eventually, but right now they don't want it. Let's move on here. So can you explain why the people in Taiwan are worried? Yeah, sure. So on a simple level, what people in Taiwan are seeing, is across the world, this relatively small democracy that has been invaded by a much bigger country, an authoritarian neighbor that claims sovereignty over it and claims the right to grab it, to invade it, based on particular version of history. Sitting in Taiwan, it's really not hard to draw the parallel with China. There's one thing, interestingly to point out. There does seem to be a growing concern in Taiwan about whether or not the U.S. would join Taiwan in a fight against China. About this has been kind of a cornerstone of U.S. policy towards China and Taiwan. But the Ukraine war has raised some questions about that. There was a poll released last week that showed about 60% of respondents don't think the U.S. would jump in. 5 months ago in October, 65% thought the U.S. would help defend Taiwan. So we're seeing kind of a switch when it comes to some American people based on the current conflict that's happening between Ukraine and Russia. Some American people are now saying the United States will not help Taiwan in a situation. It would put the United States in a very, very tough situation. That's why many people in Taiwan are worried about, does this conflict that's happening in Europe create a window, create an opportunity for the Chinese to invade Taiwan and put the full pressure on the United States now dealing with the issue in Europe and the issue in the Pacific if China were to advance into Taiwan, which is a very small island right off the coast of China that China wants. And China eventually, whether it's in a year, 6 months, 5 years, 10 years, based on their current military growth, their current trajectory, they are going to get. And the United States is going to have to deal with that and understand Do we use resources to try and defend Taiwan against China? I think the bigger picture in all of this is China cares about their standing in the West, at least in the West in terms of the media, in terms of sanctions, things like that. They care a lot more than Russia did. Maybe Russia just miscalculated it, and to be honest, it is pretty crazy the amount of sanctions the West has put onto Russia. I'm sure Putin didn't think all of these crazy sanctions, especially against all the Russian billionaires, were going to come this swiftly and this fast and this united in terms of just Western hate towards Russia. I think China is sitting back, they're learning, they're understanding the mistakes that Russia made with the invasion into Ukraine to piss off the West, and they're not going to go ahead and do anything to Taiwan, which would completely alienate themselves against the West, because you get all of these American people who absolutely hate Russia right now, hate China, because China would essentially be doing the same thing. Now, I think it's different because Ukraine is a lot bigger than Taiwan, a lot bigger. It's different in that sense, but in the sense of a larger country invading a smaller democratic country, it's the same. And that's the parallel many of these American citizens are going to draw. Basically the same. China's basically doing the same thing as Russia. That's what they would say. And I think China and the Chinese government know that. And they're saying there's no reason for us to invade Taiwan right now and really alienate ourselves against the West. But they also have to be thinking, if we were to invade Taiwan, we would really ramp up the pressure on the United States, considering the current situation that's happening in Europe and the United States focus on that. It's definitely an opportunity. Again, this is the same thing like with North Korea testing all of their missiles. If North Korea was testing all of their missiles 6 months ago, it would be front page on New York Times for 2 straight weeks, and you'd have American citizens wondering if we should sanction North Korea. But nobody cares right now. North Korea is getting away with it, and they're specifically timing it during this European war that's going on right now, because everyone's main focus is on the war. And if you're China, you have to understand and think about the unique opportunity of kind of the balance in power, to where instead of, if we invaded Taiwan during peacetime, we've got 100% of the Western media coverage, just like Russia does right now. Just like all this Russian hate that's going on to them is because there's no huge war happening in any other part of the world, or huge thing with a massive country invading another country. It's only Russia and Ukraine. If China invades Taiwan, now you've got 2 situations. Now you have to divert some of your attention to the one situation, your other half to the other. It's kind of a balance, a switch. But I think China is a little bit afraid of these sanctions, of their standing with the West. They care about it, and they're not going to do something and be overzealous to where they know how fast they're building their military, their overall economy is already passing the United States at this point. It's ridiculous. They're not going to do something like invading Taiwan that would make the entire West hate them and really galvanize American citizens against China. I thought we should have used the pandemic as an excuse to gain political leverage over China, and with the help of NATO, try and sanction China due to blaming them, blaming the pandemic on them, blaming the spread of the pandemic. You can say, listen, whether it came from a lab or not, that's not the Chinese fault. I really don't care. The point of the situation is, the virus came from China, and we need to use that as political leverage. This is a virus that killed hundreds of thousands of Americans, hundreds of thousands of Europeans. Let's use it as political leverage to sanction a rapidly growing superpower in China. And nobody wanted to do it. Nobody wanted to do it. They said, it's a mistake, whatever. Yeah, I'm sure it was a mistake. That's fine. It doesn't matter. We need to use the situation for political leverage. But nobody wanted to do that. So we just let China keep building, and I think China loves the current situation that's happening. Why would China want to, hurt its standing in the West when we're just letting them grow, undetected, just letting them grow, letting them do whatever they want? So, there's really no reason for China at this point to make the entire West the enemy. I would love if China invaded Taiwan, because then at least you'd have the American people realizing that China is really the number one threat. And China's looking at this situation as a perfect example and saying, every American is going to hate us just like they hate the Russians right now. And we're going to get sanctioned and NATO is going to get involved. And we don't want a situation where our current standing in the world gets disrupted because of a dispute with Taiwan. They know they're going to get Taiwan, whether it's in 6 months or 6 years. They're waiting for the right time to pounce. And definitely, you got to wonder, you got to question, is right now the right time to pounce? Because there is a lot of distraction in Europe with the war happening there. But I think China still realizes they have to grow more. And they've had this such massive advancement in terms of their military budget, but it's got to get better to the point where it can almost rival the United States. Right now, they're around $300 billion spending on military. It's actually a lot more than that. They don't release their real numbers, but it says almost 300 million. The United States with Biden, I think it's reported Biden wants the budget at around $813 billion, which is good news. We're almost going to hit $1 trillion in terms of our military defense budget. And the reason we're spending so much on the military, everyone asks it, when you've got a country like China expanding rapidly, we need to show China that we're not letting up at all in terms of our military, that you will not be the number one superpower. The scariest thing about China is their population, the overall control they have over their citizens. It's something many American politicians envy. And the reason they've got such great control is due to their economic system, is due to the communist rule. You've got everyone in China, all of the citizens, it's kind of like a conveyor belt. And you've got all of the citizens doing just one thing, just focused on one thing, as opposed to America. You've got people doing all different types of things. And that's the difference between a communist society and a capitalist society. The communist society, if you're ruling over it, every person is a cog. Every person has a certain mentality. I just have to do my job. And it's a much easier way to control the citizens. And China, with this military budget and with the amount of overall soldiers, ground soldiers they're going to be able to produce due to their crazy population, along with India, I did a video of China and India bonding over the West currently getting pissed at them for not condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China and India are going to make a massive military agreement. I'm sure of it. Whether or not they bring Russia into it, I think it would make sense for them. And I think they could very easily say, you know what, the reason we're doing this agreement is because of NATO. It's because of NATO 100%. NATO's power, NATO's strength is a major threat to us. So we need to have a counter sort of alliance, and there's nothing NATO can do about it. So I think that's the next big step in terms of what China wants to do. They're seeing this, and it's more of a learning experience for the Chinese on what not to do, on how not to alienate the West. They need to figure out a way to take Taiwan, but make it so all of the people in the West don't turn against them. And this is really an American thing because, Russia is kind of with Europe. United Kingdom has to worry about Russia. Spain has to worry about Russia. Germany has to worry about Russia. France has to worry about Russia. The Netherlands has to worry about Russia. All those countries have to worry about Russia. The United States has to worry about China. Okay? Canada has to worry about China. North America as a whole is worried about China. And again, obviously everyone's focused with Ukraine and things like that. And I proposed leaving NATO because to me, that's a whole different thing. There's not a real reason at this point to be in NATO when you look at every single country in NATO and you see the United States just so far out ahead in terms of their military budget, in terms of their spending, in terms of their burden that's going to fall on them if a war breaks out in Europe to where the United States is going to have to foot the bill for most of what happens in Europe when we've got China right to the left of us, creating a major empire, but we have to worry about Europe because of NATO? Guys, we need to shift our focus and be more overseers like China. I'm not saying we don't need military agreements in Europe. We do. But China right now is growing at such a rate we've never seen something like this before. And when I saw Biden was increasing the military budget, Let me actually see if I can find this. Here it is. There's a comparison. Biden's proposed budget spends 18 more times on the Pentagon than on climate programs. And Biden's 2023 budget request, $813 billion for the military, which is up. And then it says $45 billion for climate change. And again, to the people who say we need to spend more on climate change, if you think climate change is going to kill human beings, in the next 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, take a plane ride to Shanghai, China. They produce double the CO2 emissions as the United States. Once China gets down to our level, we will improve our climate. Because right now, China's not doing a damn thing to do anything about their CO2 emissions. So you know what? If you really care and you say this is so horrible and that all of our children's children are going to die from climate change, the number one reason that is not because of the United States. It's because of China. They're over double our CO2 emissions. It's so disingenuous, this rhetoric, this blame America. It's America's fault climate change is happening. Then how, okay, yes, we have crazy CO2 emissions. The best thing for everyone to do, if we were an advanced civilization, we would be spending more money on climate change than on the military. But we're not an advanced civilization. We may have advanced technology, but us as humans, we're not wired. We're not advanced enough to get out of this tribalism, this war between countries. Like China wants to take Taiwan and Russia wants to take Ukraine, and the United States has to have the number one military budget times 10 because we just have to be the best. We are imperfect human beings. Humans will eventually graduate, will eventually evolve. We're not there yet. We're not going to be there in 100 years. We're not going to be there in 200 years. This is the reality of the situation. This is why a Democratic president like Biden comes out and says, listen, we're actually upping the military budget to $813 billion, which I was very happy about that, Biden upping the budget there. We've got an update here. Kremlin spokesman, Biden's statement about Putin's staying in power are disturbing and a personal insult. So Biden coming out and saying that Putin needs to be removed. The White House had to walk back the statement. Really just embarrassing for the United States. Honestly, if I was the Biden administration, I don't know why you walk that back. I mean, I think the whole rhetoric of the West, we act like we're better than other countries and stuff, it's an annoying rhetoric, and Biden probably shouldn't have said that about Putin. But when you walk it back, you're just making your country, you're making your party look so much more weak. Who cares if Biden says that, honestly? At the end of the day, if he's going to say it, you have to let him say it. You can't just walk it back and say, oh, we didn't mean that. It makes you look so much more weak. Personally, I think it's ridiculous. It shows an arrogance to the United States that we want other people out of power. But again, it's not like Biden's just randomly saying this. I mean, Putin did invade Ukraine first. Let's be honest. He's the one that invaded and is trying to conquer Ukraine. We've got another update on this Florida situation with this bill. Oh boy. Fun fact, Florida statute does not censor classroom discussion of sensitive topics like suicide, drug use, death, or abortion. So why pass a law censoring discussion of sexual orientation and gender identity unless the homophobia and transphobia was the point? Hashtag say gay away. So I'm not too sure what point this representative is trying to make. I don't think there's any teachers out there teaching second graders about suicide, drug use, or abortion. Are they, again, we're talking about the young children that this bill is targeting. This is first through third graders. I would agree about the transphobic stuff if you're saying you can't bring it up 7th or 8th grade. Even then, I don't think there's a place for it in the classroom. But that's a different argument with 6th, 7th, 8th graders, more mature kids that have a greater understanding. But first through third grade, I don't even know how this bill is this is an argument. How is this an argument? They pass a bill saying, listen, you can't bring up trans stuff if the kid's in 1st grade or 2nd grade or 3rd grade. No shit. You shouldn't be talking about that type of stuff with children that are that young. I think it's an argument when they get into 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I think that's the argument. This should not even be an argument. But alas, here we are in the 21st century, with people saying, you know what, you got to teach, kindergartners about trans rights and trans issues. And like, oh, you want to approach a young kid, maybe you are transgender, maybe you are gay. Like, imagine your first grade teacher asking you, are you really a boy? Like, you're a boy, but are you really? Maybe you're a girl. Do you feel like a girl today? Do you want to transition? Like, guys, these kids are too young, and this type of stuff really should just be a no-nonsense policy passed about all this type of stuff. These kids that are this young, first through third grade, you got to stick to school. Stick to teaching them about math, science, basics of learning. And, if the parents want to bring it up when they're that young, that's a parental decision made amongst the parents. We don't need these teachers forcing things like this down children's throats, especially first through third grade. I thought everyone would be in agreement on this. I think the argument is like, once you get into 6th, 7th, 8th graders, do you want teachers to start, is there enough trans people to where we need to teach other children that are in later grades, not first through third, where we need to teach the other children that this is a possibility and prepare them for that, as opposed to, like you could be dealing with a trans person, you have to accept it, things like that. But like first through third grade, the kids are just not mature enough to handle it, and you'll get situations where people will be peer pressured into transitioning. It gets real ugly, and again, I don't know the numbers overall, but there are cases where, especially now, where it's seen as so accepted, almost like a badge of honor, true transition. Some of these kids transitioning and then taking hormone blockers, and then 3 years later when they actually grow up regretting it. I've also heard of kids being extremely happy they transitioned at the young age that they did. So it's a complex issue, but the idea of teachers teaching it a certain way, if every single teacher was ridiculously skilled on the topic and was going to teach it in a completely informative manner, maybe you would have an argument. But the majority of teachers that bring this up to first graders, second graders, third graders normally have a like a far left demographic leaning, which is a major issue. It's not like these are scientists telling these kids, breaking it down, saying this is why this happens. This is why this happens. If you're a first grade teacher and you're talking to kids about trans rights, you clearly have another agenda. Let's just call it what it is. You clearly have another agenda. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.